Okay, good morning. We're going to get started. Welcome to our third Curriculum and Instruction Network Leaders Network meeting. I'm really happy that you're here. And I also want to say welcome to our webcast viewers. I was pleased that last time we had 18 of your colleagues from far reaches in the county accessing this meeting by webcast. So that was really good to hear, and I got a lot of feedback about that was a real positive for them, so that if they're really far away, it's hard to come for a 2-hour meeting, so they appreciated the opportunity to be able to learn alongside us, but not traveling that distance. So I'm going to have Oscar come up real quick, and then we're going to do some introductions. He just has a little bit of extra information to the webcast audience for just 1 minute about questions that how they can ask questions during the meeting. And this wouldn't be happening with the webcast without Oscar. He's amazing.
Well, more so the people behind the scenes. So, good morning, welcome. So I'm just quickly going to go over how to access the webcast portion. The link should have been emailed to you. I'm going to go ahead and type it in. It's stream1.sdcoe.net/WC/CNI 012419. So you'll see this page. You'll just plug in your information and log in. So as Shannon was mentioning to you, it does have a chat feature. If you're connected remotely, you can ask questions. So once you type in the question, I will relay that question to the presenter, so you will get live responses, okay? Oh, thank you, sorry. So from here, you would just click on play. Down at the bottom, scroll to questions, and it's just gonna want you to type in your screen name and then hit enter. Click back on questions, and then you'll see it says welcome to the chat. All right? So we will be archiving these webcasts on the CNI Leaders homepage, and that is at www.sdcoe.net/ sorry if I'm going too fast, LLS-CCR. And then just scroll down to the bottom, and we'll add another area here where it says archived webcast for CNI network meetings, okay? All right. And I will be walking around, so if you have a question or comment, we will have a mic box just to make sure it funnels through the audio so it'll pick up and record. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Oscar.
You're welcome.
Okay, so I almost fell, but I didn't. So that's good. That's a good start for the day. There's a little hole over there, so I'm going to be careful walking behind this table. Anyway, so let's start with introductions. I see some familiar faces who I've seen at the meetings that we've had, but I do see a couple of new people, so that's really exciting that you're here. So Oscar's going to start, and basically we're just going to pass the little box around and just state your name and then your role and where you work, just so we know who's in the room, and then our friends on the webcast can know who's in the room as well.
Good morning again, Oscar Ramirez. I work here at SDCOE at the Learning Resource Display Center and Library Media Services as a technician.
Good morning, Steve Green, Assessment and Accountability with the Learning and Leadership Services Division.
Good morning, everyone. Jeanette Chen, Assistant Superintendent of Learning and Leadership.
Good morning, I'm John Spiegel. I'm a Director in Curriculum Instruction with a focus in science.
Hello, Teresa Kemper, Assistant Superintendent, Grossmont District.
Erin Ishikawa, Director, College and Career Readiness, Grossmont Union High School District.
April Moore, Assistant Superintendent of Educational Services, Escondido Union High School District.
Good morning, Sabrina Lee, Solana Beach School District Assistant Superintendent.
Denise Parnell, Director in Ed Services at Cajon Valley.
Minerva Salas, Principal at Oak Grove Middle School for the Humboldt Del Sur Union School District.
Good morning, Shelley Peterson, Assistant Superintendent, Instructional Services in Del Mar.
Good morning, Andre Gray, Assistant Superintendent, Ed Services, Encinitas.
Hi, Kim Reed, Assistant Superintendent of Ed Services, Lakeside.
Morning, Heather Griffiths, Principal at Dehesa Elementary School.
Good morning, Maritza Kepin, Superintendent Principal at Vallecito School District.
Good morning, I'm Paige Metz. I'm at the Health and Physical Education Coordinator and the Coordinator for the Curriculum and Instruction Network for Public Charter Schools here at the San Diego County Office of Education.
Good morning, everyone. Gina Bishop from San Marcos.
Good morning, Teresa Grace, Assistant Superintendent of Ed Services in Ramona Unified.
Good morning, Cindy DeClerc, Executive Director, Poway Unified.
Good morning, Bruce Peterson, Senior Director for Juvenile Court and Community Schools here at San Diego County Office of Ed.
Good morning, Matt Simon, Coordinator, Curriculum and Instruction at Juvenile Court and Community Schools.
Stephanie Pierce, Assistant Superintendent, Santee. I think you're supposed to be able to throw this, too.
Okay, get ready.
I have heard that.
All right, woo. Good morning.
catch.
Megan Battle, Director, Learning in Coronado Unified.
Good morning, Kasha Abza, Coordinator of Curriculum and Instruction in Oceanside.
All right, good morning. Christy Martelli, Principal of Mountain Empire Unified School District.
All right, thanks everyone for coming. We grouped you again. We did get some feedback. We grouped you again by district type, and that was a positive. When I was reading the responses to the reflections from the last meeting, you liked that idea because you want to get to know each other in terms of the work that you're doing, and it's a little nuanced when you think about a high school district versus an elementary district. So we did that again today, especially when we're going to be talking about the use of universal screeners. It looks different at the elementary level and the secondary level. Denise sent out the link, so hopefully you have access to the Google Slides that we'll be going through today and all of the documentation that will be passed out in paper form. Okay, so just to reflect on the goals that we determined that we were going to think about this year to make these meetings productive and successful and you feeling like you're walking away with new information that you can take back to your district and share and make plans for your own district on how you're going to implement different pieces of curriculum and instruction ideas. So the first one was to provide you with timely information. That's especially true today because Jeanette is going to speak to us about the California Systems of Support and how schools are going to be identified for support and improvement through ESSA, which is very timely. It's actually, we're just learning information as it comes, so we're going to share with you what we know. We're going to build collective leadership capacity. Everyone in this room is a leader and has a wealth of knowledge, and I know that you really appreciate opportunities to engage in collaborative discussions and share best practices across the districts. That's a common theme when I hear your comments, is that you really like having opportunities to talk and process what you've just heard. So after each section in the agenda today, there's a slide or time for you to have table discussions so that you can do some processing and then think about what questions you might have that we can hopefully answer for you. So today what we're going to do is we're going to be speaking about, Jeanette is going to speak about the California System of Support and the identification of schools for support and improvement. John is going to come up and talk about NGSS instructional materials, time training update. I spent some time up in Claremont in December learning about the process for adoption of materials. It's very different than the process that we had for language arts and mathematics, and I think in a very good way. And John is going to speak to that today and then let you know opportunities for your district to think about how you can get information and access that training. And then last, we're going to continue our assessment for learning series that we're doing. So last time we talked about building a data culture and you took a self-assessment and we thought about how are you thinking about using data in your district. Today we're going to look at an aspect of a comprehensive assessment system, and that's universal screening. And some of you may have lots of experience with that, some of you may not have any. And so my hope today is to give you some background information and resources that you may use as you go forward. And then the next 2 times that we meet, Melissa Spaden is going to be here with me, and we're going to do 2 sessions on formative assessment and how best practices for formative assessment, and that will conclude our year in our learning series. Okay, so I'm going to bring up Jeanette, and she is going to start our section on the California System of Support. The next slide, you actually have a copy of in your folder, so you might want to pull that out.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to try that again. Good morning, everyone. I like to hear people's voice in the morning. It just gives me energy, and hopefully this is probably not the most exciting topic, but it's very, very timely. And I just realized yesterday and the day before that I assume a lot of times that people know what we know at the county office because we interact with the state all the time. And that's not a really good thing for me to assume that. We have a lot of interactions and a lot of communication with your superintendents. And we also know that your superintendents are very, very busy. So when they do share information with you, it may be at a very big picture level and not a lot of detail. And maybe it's because they don't have all the information at the time, or because, again, they're busy. So I wanted to make sure that all of you had the information around systems of support. How many of you have heard around the idea of the new structure that the state has put together around systems of support? A few of you? Okay. So like the state likes to do, they like to introduce a lot of new acronyms. And so I'm going to be talking, hopefully, with you about the structure, but if I throw out an acronym that you don't understand or that you say, hey, can you slow down, what does that mean? It's because, again, I'm assuming that you know what the acronym stands for, and just raise your hand and say, you know, what does that acronym mean and what does it stand for? So the state has shifted its approach in how we're working with schools. In the past, for its accountability system, if you recall, the state was very, I guess the term is a little bit more punitive than it has been and is hoping to be. And so the new accountability system is set up in such a way that what the intent is to provide support to districts, to provide work where we work alongside the districts to identify your needs, to support you in implementing actions and services that you feel will address the needs of your students, so ultimately that there's positive student outcomes. If you recall, with program improvement, the county offices were given the assignment or responsibility to go into districts, and it seemed really heavy-handed. There was consequences as years went by if schools didn't pull out of program improvement, so they went from program improvement 1, 2, 3, if you recall. And then if schools didn't get out of program improvement, there were more punitive kinds of consequences. Well, that's no longer the case. And so even though you see these levels of support, and when you hear, oh, somebody's in a district year 1, differentiated assistance, that doesn't equate to the old program improvement. So I just want to make that really clear, that the intent and the purpose of the new accountability system is for us to work alongside you. It's not to hit anybody over the head with the stick. It's to really come alongside and support your improvement ideas and your improvement processes, okay? So the first level of accountability is support for all. If you think of this in terms of MTSS, this is what the state is considering level 1 support, and these are services and support that county offices can provide to districts, and it doesn't matter if you're identified for differentiated assistance or not. So I'll give you some examples of level 1 services. Some of the level 1 services that we have here at the county, specifically in LLS, are things like our adoption process. So what John's going to talk about later on with the toolkit and the support around the toolkit, that's considered a level 1 support. The coaching network, what we're doing today with with the CNI team and with all of you, that's considered a level 1 support. We're giving you information. So there's a lot of things that the county office provides for all our districts, regardless if you're considered a differentiated assistance district or not, okay? For level 2 is support for districts who have been identified for differentiated assistance. This is the second year of differentiated assistance. Some of you may have been identified last year and then may have been also identified again this year. We have 22 districts from our county who have been identified for differentiated assistance this year. So there's a growing number of districts that are now being found eligible because there's more indicators, and eventually next year charter schools will also be identified for differentiated assistance. So as time goes by, there's more indicators, there's more possibility for eligibility for differentiated assistance. First it was our districts, and then it'll be our charter schools. The way that I think about differentiated assistance eligibility, well, we all know what the casinos look like, right? We live in San Diego. So if you think about the slot machine with all the lines, right, how you can be a winner, that's how I think about differentiated assistance. There's all these different indicators, all this different type of criteria, and at some point, you may or more than likely be eligible for differentiated assistance. And I want people to understand it's really not a bad thing. It's really a way for us to come alongside you again, to go through a process to help you understand your needs in a much deeper way, and then help develop implementation plans on how you're going to address the needs of all of your students. The level 3 support is something that not just we, but the state really hasn't, they haven't detailed what that work's gonna look like. It'll take a number of years before districts get into a level 3 intensive support type of situation. And so they really haven't put together a process. What they're saying to us and what they want us to message to all the districts is that, again, it's not going to be a punitive level 3 support. Remember, in the past, what would happen was either principals would be reassigned, staff at schools would be reassigned. In the worst case scenario, a superintendent would be removed, and then the state would assign a person to kind of take over the district. Well, that's not what's going to happen in this level 3 support. So we don't know what that'll look like as far as the actual support, but the consequences will definitely not be the same. The other part of the systems of support is the structure in which the state has set up the support. And so what they're saying to us is if any district needs any kind of help, any kind of support, they would come to their county office first. And the county office, most of the time, has expertise with people in their office to provide the support that districts need. Oftentimes, though, you may have a very particular, very specific need that our county office maybe doesn't have the human capacity at the time to support you with, or maybe the expertise doesn't live and reside within that county office. What then would happen is that the county office would go to what they're calling a GeoLead agency. San Diego County Office of Ed is one of those GeoLead agencies. We are a lead along with Riverside County Office of Ed. There's 7 GeoLeads across the state, and so we were selected to be a GeoLead because we do have numerous areas of expertise. And so now we're not just providing support to all of you as districts and charters in San Diego County, we're also providing support to our region, which is all of Southern California. So if a district in Southern California goes to their county office, the county office doesn't have the expertise, then they come to San Diego. So we're currently supporting San Bernardino, Riverside, Orange County, Imperial County, and San Diego County. And then you see on the outside of this circle are other leads. These other leads are considered content leads, and these folks work alongside the geographic lead agencies to provide additional support, so very, very specific support. I'm going to tell you who the leads are because they're not, I don't see them up here, but the community engagement lead for the state is San Bernardino County Office of Ed. Our math initiative lead is Fresno County Office of Ed. The equity lead, where San Diego and Santa Clara are leading both. We're leading Southern California, they're leading Northern California. MTSS is Orange County. SELPA is El Dorado, West San Gabriel, SELPA, and Riverside County Office of Ed. And then our regional EL specialist lead is San Diego. So you can see we have several roles and responsibilities for this new structure of support. I'm very proud of the fact that we've been identified as leads in our EL equity and as a GEO lead, because it gives me a lot of faith in the fact that we have a lot of expertise living in our division. And so I think the state has recognized that, and so that's how they've identified these leads. So I say that because I really want to, and I expressed this to our team, that our number one priority is supporting the San Diego County districts first. And then as we move through this structure, that we provide support to our region and then to the state. And that's a really tricky thing for us because we're getting tons of calls, and my colleagues can attest to this, that we're getting calls for support throughout the state, and I'm having to say, hold on, we need to figure out the time that we have to manage with our team first, and then if our districts don't need our support, then we can move on to something else. So that's kind of a really tricky thing that we're working on, but that's what is, I guess, the positive and the negative of being identified for the great work that you do. So here are the GEO lead agencies. We have at the very top is Shasta, Sonoma, Placer and Sacramento are co-leads, Alameda, Kern, and then Riverside, San Diego. So the way that the structure is set up also is that, let's say you have a very, very unique area of interest, and you come to San Diego as a GEO lead, and we don't have that expertise. We then go out to any of the other GEO leads that may have that expertise and support your district. So it's really a process and a protocol that the state has set up and how we're working with districts so that we're really not stepping on each other's toes, and then also so that we're doing some work that's very comprehensive. And so again, we're working alongside our Northern California folks so that what they're doing up there is very consistent with what we're doing in Southern California. Okay, so are there any questions about that structure? I can tell you a lot of detail about the what as we are basically building the plane as we fly it. We have a meeting on February 11th and 12th with all the what they're calling cross-agency leads at the state, where we're supposed to be having the conversations about the what and the how of that structure. And the cross-agency leads, just so that you know, are CDE, the State Board of Ed, and CCEE. So they're really the leads at the state that are pushing down some of this information. So are there any questions around the structure of the systems of support? No? All right, so let's move on to the identification of schools under ESSA. How many of you have heard of the new acronym CSI, TSI, ATSI? A few of you. Okay. You're going to walk away knowing 3 more acronyms after today. So as part of, as you know, LCAP is really the state plan. And this accountability system or structure that I just spoke about is really a state-guided system. We also have to, though, be accountable to the federal government. And so under ESSA, we have an accountability system that really we have to, as a state, adhere to as well. And so the system of accountability for the federal government, for ESSA, identifies schools in particular that are considered low performing. So the new categories or labels for this accountability of the lowest performing schools is CSI, which is now Comprehensive Support and Improvement, TSI, Targeted Support and Improvement, and ATSI, which is Additional Targeted Support and Improvement. Which one of those do you think is the least, or I guess the first step into this accountability? Which one would you think you go into first? CSI. So they're basically, the way that they're lined up is a way that you're going through the continuum of accountability. So you would be identified first for CSI, TSI, TSI. Although I'm going to share with you the way that they're rolling it out this time around is a little bit interesting. So if you're TSI, you automatically go to ATSI. I know. So how are schools being identified for CSI? So there's really two groups of schools that are going to be identified for CSI. The first is the lowest performing 5% of Title I schools. So 5% of Title I schools across the state will be identified for CSI. And then any of the high schools that have a graduation rate below 67%. Okay, so you can imagine that's quite a number of schools. How often are the schools identified for CSI? What they're saying right now is that the identification would be for 3 years. So if a school in your district is identified this year, they will continue under CSI for 3 years. Is that right, Patty?
So they can
move? Right, so I'll get to the exit criteria later, but that's what their identification would be is for 3 years. Okay. Yes.
So many schools in a district or a county, so it's truly the lowest 5%, is that accurate?
Yes and no. Do you want to answer that?
So the last information that I've received is that they are not going to cap it at 5%. It could possibly go up to 11. Basically, any school that would be eligible for CSI will be on the list. So they went with the 5%. That was the minimum of what the federal government said. But according to CDE right now, it will be any of the schools.
So, and here's some more information about the 5%. So it would be all schools, including alternative schools, which, again, it's something that Bruce and Matt that are in the room, or any of you who have alternative schools in your districts, they will also be considered for eligibility or identification for CSI if they meet the criteria. Okay, so they're using this last dashboard to identify the schools. So the dashboard that was released December, that's the information that they're using for this criteria and identification. Okay. The identification is also based on school level performance of the all students category. So it's not necessarily looking at groups, it's looking at the all student group category. Okay. What they're saying, and I don't know if your superintendents have shared this with you, is this identification of schools, this list is supposed to come out this week, right? That's what they're saying at CDE, but again, it's CDE. But that's what they're saying. It should be coming out in January. And really, it behooves them to put out the list pretty quickly. And I'll share with you why in just a minute, because there's some things that you have to do to get funding for this work. And the summary of the work that you have to do has to be done alongside your LCAP. So the list is really important. Graduation rates. So again, the other criteria is graduation rates. I'll take your question in just a minute. Graduation rates is below 67%. So again, it's any high school that has a graduation rate below the 67% over 2 years. So what they're going to be looking at is your graduating class of 2017 and 2018. And then they'll look at that percentage of students, and if it's below 67%, a school can also meet the criteria that way. And again, it includes high schools that fall under the DAS, so alternative high schools. And again, it's based on the all-student group. Okay. Yes. I believe the letter goes to the superintendent. Typically, I don't know, Steve, have you heard about the assessment coordinators getting any of the information?
Not initially. I know it'll be a letter to the superintendent.
Yeah.
As happened with other accountability pieces, typically they funneled it after that through other networks. So assessment coordinators, accountability coordinators typically, but I haven't heard.
Yeah. I was up in Sacramento at the end of last week, and what they had shared was that list would come out probably Thursday or today or tomorrow of this week. So if you don't get it this week, I would circle back with your superintendents probably Monday or Tuesday and say, have you gotten the list? If you haven't, then as soon as we find out when it'll come out, we'll push some information out to you. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Based on language arts and math, based on how many red categories you have? What's it based on?
Is it the exact same thing as like an LEA? But it's now at the school level, all students.
Yeah, so you're looking at all red, you're looking at mostly red and orange, you're looking at, there's like 5 different categories.
So it's the same criteria, like you have to have orange and red in the academics,
And then
red
if you
and
do
red.
this,
Yeah. And you have to have 2 indicators, 2 areas.
You want to share? Oscar, Patty will give more details.
So for the LEAs, it is, as you were saying, you have to, so it's interesting, but you could have only one indicator, and that be red, and you would go in. Okay? The school would, not the LEA, the school, sorry. You can have all red and orange across the board for the school. You could have 5 indicators where the majority are red and the other ones, so if you had 5 indicators, 3 were red and the other ones were a variety of different colors, that school would be eligible. You could, I'm like pulling it from my brain right now. Okay, so red and orange, all red, of course. Red majority, all red and one of any other color. So you could have red, 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 blue. That would be it. So those are the criteria that would identify the school, the Title I school for CSI. That same criteria goes into identifying schools for TSI, which will be discussed shortly. And one other thing, if a school has both grad rate and all students, they'll go in for grad rate above all students. So grad rate would be the area that they would be identified for. So for instance, I know of a continuation school, has grad rate and all students. They would go in because of grad rate. Okay.
So it could be one or the other. It doesn't have to necessarily be both.
Right, but if they had both, it would be basically grad rate trumps all students.
All right. TSI. So TSI, if this is a little bit different, this is for not just Title I schools, it's for Title I schools and non-Title I schools. So if you have well, all schools are either Title I or non-Title I. So this is a little bit different. For CSI, it's Title I, and for TSI, it can be any school. So what is the criteria for TSI? Again, it's schools with one or more student groups that for 2 consecutive years meet the same criteria used to identify schools for CSI. And they have the performance colors for at least 2 state indicators. And again, alternative schools are included in identification for TSI. Okay. So that's the main difference, is that non-Title I schools can also be identified. And then a school can be identified for support in one category at the time. So schools identified for CSI won't be identified for TSI or ATSI. So they'll only be in one category. If they're identified for CSI, they're CSI. They're not CSI and TSI. So it's just one label. I guess that's a better word. They'll have one label. So yeah, I'm telling you, these new acronyms. Identification of TSI and ATSI. So a school can only be identified again for support in one of the categories. So if a school's a CSI, they won't be TSI or ATSI. I think this is the same information here. So it's really just, again, that one label. ATSI. So ATSI, again, is, if you look at the continuum, it's the one that's considered probably the most significant level of support type of school. And so again, for this particular label or category, they're using the 2018 dashboard. And in order to meet the requirement for ATSI, they're looking at both the 2017 and 2018 because it has to be those consecutive years. Identification, though, occurs only once every 3 years again. And what they're thinking about doing is resetting the way that they're doing this. So this is where the confusing part comes in, and I think I have a picture of it. Yeah, here it is. So what happens is, I'm not necessarily 100% clear, and I don't know, Patty, if you are, but I think what's happened is that we kind of jumped on to this accountability for the federal government really late at the state level. And so now we're kind of going back and trying to figure out how do we identify these schools so that we meet the letter of the law for ESSA. And at the same time, we're going to have to at some point reshift this way of identifying, not necessarily the way of identifying, but the timeline for identifying. So what they're saying right now is they're using the 2018 dashboard to identify CSI, TSI, and ATSI. Next year, when the 2019 dashboard comes out, what they'll do is those schools that were identified for TSI are going to drop automatically into ATSI. In 2020, they'll have a new list of TSI schools. So the ones that dropped in from ATSI in 2019 will move over to 2020 ATSI. In 2021, they'll have another list for a brand new 3-year list for TSI. And then that'll be the new kind of cycle. And then in 2022, that's when the schools will drop officially and formally into to ATSI. If they stay and don't come out if they don't meet the criteria for exiting, okay? So this is where it gets, again, the timeline's a little bit tricky because we're kind of behind the timeline. So if your schools, again, are identified for TSI, unfortunately, they automatically get dropped into ATSI the following year, okay? And this is just the narrative of what I tried to explain with that graphic, okay? And you have a copy of these slides, right, Shannon? So you can take this back and kind of look at this again. Go ahead.
One other thing that the state has said, and they haven't determined how many years or at what point this will happen, but once a school is in ATSI, after a number of to-be-determined years, they would roll up into CSI. So if you remember, CSI is all students. So we're looking, across the board, that's what brings that school in, and it's just Title I schools. TSI, ATSI is looking at that student group and any school. So potentially, a school that wasn't Title I could be in TSI after 2 years of that same student group, or that didn't progress, then go into ATSI, and then after a number of years, be in the CSI piece. So it has even more of a cycle that could add to that graphic.
So exiting, unfortunately, that there's going to be identification. I mean, the goal is obviously to have our schools exit and not be identified. Again, we want, at the end of the day, it's about student outcomes, right? And doing what we need to do for students. And I mean, I'm a really strong proponent of we need to do what's best for kids. And so this is just kind of the hoops that we have to jump through, unfortunately. So exit criteria. So how do schools get out of CESI, TSI, or ATSI? It can be done annually. So even though, again, the identification of a school is supposed to be for 3 years, the schools can exit after a year, or after 2 years, or after 3 years. So there is a way to get out after a year. If, again, there's improvement in the status and change of the indicators that they were identified for. Okay. The part that I didn't include in here, so let me go back. The part that I didn't include here, excuse me, is the summary that that you all have to write at the LEA level. So what happens is once your schools are identified for any of those categories, your schools will have to write a SIPSA, and the SIPSA is going to look different. There's going to be new requirements in the SIPSA based on these categories. Patty's going to give the state and federal folks, hopefully at some point when you get all the details of what that SIPSA and the elements of that look like. And then, so the schools will write this SIPSA, knowing, and we know, and we brought this up to the state last week, that all of the districts don't have the same cycle for SIPSA approval. Some of you already had your SIPSAs approved for the year. What they said to us was they're going to have to go back and address the elements for this identification and then take it back to their board as an addendum to their SIPSAs and just let them know that this is a new requirement. If you haven't already approved your SIPSAs for the year, hopefully you'll get the information before that, and probably all of you already had them approved. So again, it's timing. And I know, and if you can see my facial expression, you know that I know that I've been in your shoes and I know what that's like, that this happens to us often where we're always kind of trying to play catch up. And so that's what they're asking, is that the schools write the new SIPSA. What the districts then have to do is they'll take the information from the school SIPSAs and they'll roll that up into a summary for the district. They haven't given us a lot of details. I don't know if they've given Patty a whole lot of detail. I know they haven't for us at the LEA level of what that summary will look like. What was that? Right. So there's some level of detail around what that might look like. There's instructions in the new LCAP template that hopefully give you some guidance in there, but I know that there's going to be some more information coming out. So what will happen is you're going to be writing a summary for all of the schools in the LCAP. That LCAP then comes to the county office like it always does. We approve the LCAP with that summary and we send it to the State Board of Ed for final, well, just I guess their consent approval.
So it is in the LCAP, but as far as the plan summary piece, the one thing that they did say is that basically, because we were asking for like exemplars, if you will, because if we're supposed to look at these and know what we're approving, but they're not going to give us exemplars. I'm like, can we get a rubric at least? I don't know, something. But they just said they want expanded answers. That was what I heard. So there's that piece. And just for clarification, only the CSI schools are in the plan summary. So the TSI schools, or ATSI, do have to do some work on their school plan, but the plan summary is just in reference to what is happening with the CSI schools, which is about half, potentially half as many as the TSI schools. So.
However, for that, and that's true. However, you will, if you're going to be asking the state for funding for TSI or ATSI work, then what will happen is you will have to document the actions, activities that you're using to support those schools for that funding.
Regarding your comment about some site plans have approved or not approved order, so is this a rewrite of the current school year plan then, the 18-19, or are we talking about the plans we're building right now that are really for the 19-20 school year? Just one.
So it's my understanding it would be for the 18-19 because the dashboard that they're using is a 18, right? Is for the following year.
For the following year. So it's supposed to fall in alignment with that. So because you're not going to be able to reflect on what happened this year because you're just, so the development part of your planning stages from identification to June, let's say, or whenever, is going to be, what is your plan to go forward for 1920?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So if you're right. So if the SIPs that, let's say you approved your SIPs in October for this school year, those are done. So it's what you're working on from October until. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
But again, everybody's on a different timeline. That's what makes this really tricky.
So I know that they rolled out a template that looks like a mini LCAP for school plans for student achievement. And they said that at this point it was optional and being thought through. I'm assuming that the idea is that there will be that template in place next year because it does look very much like with putting in your dashboard and doing all of that good stuff at the school level. Do you know where they're at on that?
They're not mandating it. They're saying there's elements that need to be addressed, but they're not requiring a specific SIPSA template. They have a recommended template, but they don't have one that's required, is my understanding. Yeah.
So I had a question. And we're working with the county, as you know. So, and I'm noticing that these are, so National had a reporting error when it went into CalPADS. And it identified us as differentiated assessment year 2 because it was under chronic absenteeism was the reporting error. But we have read in students with disabilities and African American suspensions, which is also questionable, but we had read in those 2 areas, but with chronic absenteeism, the way it reported is that those indicators put us in DA2, that students with disabilities also were read with chronic indicators because of the data error. So been working with you guys and, you know, we called the state, they said just put a letter in, that we're still technically in it because that's what you got to do. And so we were going to do differentiated assistance. And I said, well, okay, we're going to do it more differentiated, right? So there's no point in focusing on chronic absenteeism because it's not our issue. Now, students with disabilities with academic performance, we could use that help. So we were going to focus on that. Listening to what the reporting piece would be out, when is this actually supposed to be executed? Because last night at the board meeting, we just approved our SPSAs, the final versions. So does that all have to get redone again? Is that what I'm hearing? I guess I'm a little confused.
So it's
Yes?
Yeah, well, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, they say, I think maybe that's where you were going to go to, Patty, was they say you don't have to use that template, but then if you're going to use, and please correct me, the understanding is if you're going to use a different template, it has to go for approval from the County Board of Ed and what, or not county, but State Board of Ed, right? Is it? Or, okay, so basically it's in my I've coined it as, it's a forced use template.
It's a voluntold kind
Yeah,
of thing.
exactly. So why would, I mean, you're gonna have to go through the whole process to get it approved and all this, so why would you do that to yourself if we have this template? I don't know.
Yeah, and there's a lot of transition and a lot of details that quite frankly haven't been rolled down to us. I mean, Patty was just up there last week. I was just up there last week. And the information that we're giving you is the information that we have right now. And so know that they also know that we're all in transition. And so that's why we're sharing the information so that we can best support you. In giving you not just the information, but working with you and providing technical assistance to you and being side by side with you when a situation like nationals comes up. If we need to be there to have the conversations with CDE, that's what we're here for. But yeah, just again, remember earlier when I said we're building the airplane as we fly it, that's exactly what's happening, not just with the CSI, TSI work, but system of support work and a lot of other things that are kind of coming down from the state. Are there any other questions about that process around the SIPSAs, rolling up to the LCAP summaries, rolling up to approval at county office, and then finally to the state? Nope. All right. Sorry, I didn't mean to be the the messenger with the bad news, but again, our job is to support you the best that we can. And you probably will be bombarded with a lot of emails from our office, again, with more details around this, how to fill out templates, timelines, those kinds of things. So if you don't get them from Patty, you'll get them from Steve. If you don't get them from Steve, you'll get them from me. But we meet constantly, and again, we're trying to give you the most updated information that we just currently got last week at the state. Okay? All right, thank you very much and have a great morning. I know the next presenter has much more exciting news for you.
Thank you, Jeanette. So I know that sometimes it helps to just take a couple minutes to process what you just heard because you got a lot of information and I was processing it along the way as well. So what I'm going to have you do is just take about 4 or 5 minutes at your table to just kind of process what your understanding is, and then you can figure out if you all have the same understanding, because sometimes you can say, well, I understood this, well, I understood something different. And then if any question comes up for your table, we'll take a couple more questions before moving on. So just take a couple minutes to share at your tables first. Okay, thanks. Okay, take 30 more seconds to finish up your conversation. I know it's like, I'm like. Okay, let's come back together. Thank you. Jeanette is going to say one quick thing about CalPads, and then if you have any questions from your table, I want to make sure that you're walking away with a little bit of clarity. So I find it, so if you have questions, then feel free, and we'll adjust the agenda and schedule to make sure that you get what you need to move to go back to your district. So go ahead.
So the only other thing I wanted to mention is knowing that the schools and the districts are being identified for support, either through differentiated assistance or now these 3 new categories. One of the big implications, and I'm putting on my superintendent hat or assistant superintendent hat, would be to really have conversations with those people who are inputting information into your CalPad system. So at the district level, and then those people who are inputting information onto your SIS systems at the site level. Because now the CalPads is really the system that is being used for pretty much everything. They're actually even talking at the state level now about special ed information being connected to CalPads. And so if you have a brand new CalPads person, really getting them connected with Steve's network. I think that's a really important implication. And then again, the implication for who puts in data into your systems at the site level. If they're not putting in accurate information, then it could be technically triggering something, an eligibility that maybe shouldn't be, your school maybe doesn't really necessarily have that eligibility, but because the data isn't accurate, it's triggering eligibility. So I think that's a huge implication. And again, as a superintendent, assistant superintendent, principal, we want to make sure that that information they definitely have. Their work, again, impacts a whole lot. So that's just something I wanted to make sure that I addressed.
So while we have Steve, Patty, and Jeanette here, does anyone have any final questions before we move on to the next section of the agenda? Knowing that we will be sharing with you information as it comes along. The more we learn, the more you will learn. And I wanted to let you know we've also been talking about how to support you and how to support your schools. So we've been really thinking about, in senior leadership in Steve's department, about how do we provide you with training and how to support your schools through this process. So that will be coming, more information will be coming about that too. So once that list comes out, it'll start sort of this rolling journey that we're gonna go on to support you with working with your schools.
We have tentative dates set in February for some trainings, and we're waiting for the list and the supposed webinar for the counties, so we know how we're supposed to support all of you. But we like to be proactive and make sure that we're getting that out there, because this turnaround is going to be pretty quick, and we want to be able to support you. Plus, we will be having another LCAP federal addendum support training, because some of you weren't involved with that last year.
Okay, so again, do you have a question? I have a question around the CalPads. The people here to answer are here.
It has a county, in doing this work with the differentiated assistance, uncovered some common errors, like in chronic absenteeism and areas that they might share? Or how is that information, how do we support our CalPads folks? Is it through the data and assessment network, or?
Do you want to speak, Steve?
Thank you.
So, good question, Gina, thank you. One of the things we're looking at implementing, and we've been reaching out to other county offices that have more CalPAD support. So our data and assessment hasn't necessarily been CalPAD support. We vet questions, and then we kind of funnel it up through other places and get responses for folks. So I'll be honest in saying we haven't provided a whole lot of CalPADS training. That said, we are discovering, and even last year already, some issues like suspensions and how those are recorded and different things. It's one piece is just awareness. You know, a lot of folks didn't know that, oh, an in-school suspension is still a suspension on the dashboard, right? So some of that is just not knowing. All the codes are right, everything was input into the system correctly. So there's one level of awareness of how are things being calculated, what's in the numerator, what's in the denominator, and we're continuing to have those conversations and push that information out through our networks. But to your point around CalPADS support, I've been in conversation with Riverside County Office of Ed. They have a CalPADS network. So in addition to a data and assessment network, there's another group that's meeting, and they have a state lead. So someone from the CalPADS office comes down, and it's like a quarterly meeting. It doesn't necessarily meet with the frequency that our CNI and DNA and state and federal meet. But even that would be a huge improvement for us, right? And so my team is looking at what that would look like. So I don't want to overpromise right now. We don't have any dates on the calendar, but we recognize this as a need. We've talked with other folks across the county, our county office, because there's, you know, the IT and business, and everyone has some aspect. We do CalPADS training, but it's very specific to this, you know, little niche. So we're going to try to have something that's more global, but really it impacts the program side. So that will be forthcoming. That's also part of our ongoing support. And what I love about that is that fits perfectly with the graphic that Jeanette showed. That would be an example of level 1 support for all. But if someone's moving into differentiated assistance, right, that next level of support, and there are issues around that, then we can go deeper into looking at your systems and thinking about, you know, the processes that might be missing and gaps that could be filled. So, long answer, but thank you for the question, because it is a need, and we're working on that.
Okay. So usually we kind of take a break right now, but I'm just gonna roll along and have John come up. So if you want to get some coffee or have another burrito, then please feel free to stand up. But I want to make sure that he has his time, and then we'll talk about the rest of the agenda when he's finished. But these are two sort of right now timely things we needed to talk about, so I wanted to prioritize those pieces as we move forward in the agenda. So this is John Spiegel, Director from Curriculum Instruction.
So after that conversation, this should be fun. Good morning. This feels really weird to have to stand behind a podium whenever I'm used to constantly moving around. I get to talk a little bit about where we are in our work around supporting the instructional material selection process, but I want to just, if I may, just share a couple things. One is, as I listened to the conversation for the last hour, I spent a lot of time kind of doing my own reflection around, and I feel fortunate. I get to work within a content area, and I've been doing it for a while, you know, several years, and I feel like there's this connection that is between these big system stuff, these structures that we're putting into place, and the work that happens every day between the teacher and the student as they're in their classroom. And I hope we never lose sight of the fact that that's the most important part of the work, right? So many of the things that we're seeing, the data, comes as an effect of things that are or aren't happening every day when the teacher is in front of the students in the classroom and the opportunities that students have. And so I think there's a connection between the work we do and this larger work. And I want to just always reinforce on behalf of, I think, my colleagues in curriculum instruction, that we are here as a big support for you and for your teachers. So please take advantage of us and let us be a partner with you in the work we do. Yesterday I was with, we had our Science Leaders Network. We meet 4 times a year. We have 17 or 18 districts this year that are participating in our network. It is the best, most fun meeting you can ever go to. We've been for 5 years tackling the challenges that come with the implementation of standards, both in the structural side, the things that we have to put into place that help us to do our work, but also the instructional pieces, the changes that have to happen in the classroom. And so one of those examples of the structure and instructional piece is instructional materials. When we did, we've been doing this, what we call the concerns-based adoption model. It's a survey we give teachers. We ask them about their concerns. Guess what the biggest concern is right now among teachers? The instructional materials. Whether we have them or we don't, and if we do get them, when are we going to get them? If we get them, how are we going to use them? And we even made a chart, right? And in the middle was instructional materials. And it was like this chart that was like 80% of the concerns came out right there. So we're fortunate that we've been doing some work. I think last spring I got to come to this meeting and kind of talked about the work that was happening with our process, the supports we were putting in for instructional materials. And at the time, we were writing We were writing the toolkit for instructional materials evaluation. This was a collaborative process that happened among different county office of educations, our science community, different organizations across the state, including our subject matter projects, the K-12 Alliance, CDE, to think about a process to select good instructional materials. And we wanted to learn from the toolkits that have come out from other adoption, from other subject areas, and the one thing that we felt we really needed to really have an effective toolkit is it couldn't just be a set of rubrics and boxes that we filled out. Like we wanted to make sure that there was this embedded professional learning, that if we're going to select science instructional materials, we have to have some common understanding about what we should be looking for. For example, we use this phrase three-dimensional learning when we talk about the next generation science standards. And what that is and what that looks like can be very different among people. So we have to do some professional learning that calibrates us about what's important. So it's a good thing. The challenge with that is it also potentially increases the amount of time that it takes to really build the committees and the groups that are going to be selecting materials. So our toolkit that just came out last week officially from SESESA has these two parts. It has the rubrics, it's a process, it's very detailed, and it has a built-in professional learning piece. So what I gave you as a handout is just you take the whole toolkit and collapse it into 2 pages, and that's what you have in front of you. And it goes through the 6 main sections that are in the toolkit. So some of these are very similar to previous toolkits, and some of them are a little bit they're a little bit different. So there's the section on how we develop the district lens. What's our vision for science? What are we hoping to accomplish? What are the needs that we want to make sure our instructional materials meet? You know, some districts are looking at more open education resources. Some are looking for very heavy technology embedded materials. So it's knowing what it is that we want in those materials. That's the district lens part. The pre-screen is a part of the toolkit that helps us to say, right now there are 2 dozen elementary programs out there, and we can't pilot all of them. So we have to kind of refine down to the list of what we think is going to be really useful for us. So that's a section of the toolkit that is there. The paper screening part is the most time-intensive part of the process. It is also where the deepest learning happens. And as we've done this process, this is the really cool part. But it takes time. And this is where we go through the rubrics and we really build consensus, calibrate ourselves about what's in materials. And I just put on the side of the slide, you can see some of the things that paper screening process really has us look at as we're looking at instructional materials. And you'll notice that what isn't on that list is whether there are pretty pictures and really cool whiz-bang things in the materials. They will try to sell us on all of that, right? Underneath it is the really important stuff. How are students engaged in learning and science through these materials? What are the different ways that we can assess learning both in a formative and in a summative way? How do these materials really promote equitable learning for all students? Those are some of the things that this process really has the selection committees look at. After that, the rest of the toolkit has the piloting part where you actually try on the materials in classrooms, get feedback from teachers as they are using the materials. There's the select and recommend section, and then there's this implementation part, which is really a section to get us to think about, once we pick the materials and we're gonna put them in teachers' hands, how do we really support them along the way? So this is our roadmap for the process. The star that is there is, that's where we are doing our work. Primarily when we have done our toolkit trainings, we really focus in on the paper screening process. So we have some events. We did one a couple weeks ago. I think we had 5 districts from our county participate, which is great because our goal is all 42 districts, which means we only have 37 more to go. But we're okay with that. And whether or not these dates that you see up on the screen match the timeline where you are, we will work with you. We want to work with you to make sure that you get all the supports around it. So earlier, Jeanette talked about the idea of these level 1 supports. We really feel like the toolkit is one of those supports that accomplishes some things in professional learning, but also make sure that we're going to have the right materials come into our schools. So we're offering all of these trainings without any cost to you because we really want to have you there. And we want to have your team or part of your team come. And after you've brought a team, we are making ourselves available if you need it to be out in your districts working with you side by side throughout this process. So if there's nothing else you remember from what I've said this morning, just remember we're here to help you. So we have 2 events. One is in North County in March, and then we're doing our next one down here in June. Again, it's free. Usually we look for teams of 3 to 8. It's all flexible depending on your needs. There's another event that comes along with this that is worth mentioning, and that is coming up very soon, and that's our Instructional Materials Fair. And so that's happening on February 6th. That's here. Oscar, because apparently he's carrying lots of hats, is also taking a big part on that. So if you want to just talk about it for 1 minute.
Certainly. So the fair is happening on Wednesday, February 6th here on campus. Tentatively, we have about 52 presentation sessions scheduled that day. There are about 33 programs that we will have here, 17 publishers. We will also have display tables out in our open area, 30 sessions prior to noon, 22 sessions after the lunch hour, and it is also free to participants. So just a reminder that these fairs only happen once a year, so it just would be a great opportunity for you and your leadership staff to expose yourself to the materials in the very least. So.
Somebody asked earlier how long the materials will be available at LRDC.
So if you're unable to come that day, you can reach out to me and schedule a date and time where you can come down to our Learning Resource Display Center. We're located off campus and open Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. We will have the materials down at our Center for the Life of the Adoption, so 7-8 years.
So as you are thinking about if you're coming to the Instructional Materials Fair or afterwards, if you're setting up time for your team to go down to LRDC, that's really where that pre-screening process begins to happen, right? Because you walk in and you see shelves full of science materials and you're like, all right, how do we figure out what's useful for us? That's really what the pre-screening part is about, and so we're working with Oscar to be able to be that support as you bring people in, so that you are starting to think about the right materials that might be worthy of a more intensive paper screen. And so that's just kind of a connection between that for you. I'm going to just be quiet for a second because there's been a lot of talking, but I do want to just hear some quick conversation points since you're sitting at your leveled districts. 2 questions for you to consider, but you'll have whatever conversations you need to have. Kind of what, right now as a district, what are you thinking about your timeline for instructional materials for science, and how might this time process, it's the handout you have in front of you, how might that help you along the way? And so I'll just kind of circle around if you have questions, but give you a couple minutes to just talk with each other about where are you in this process, or what are you thinking about at this point. So we'll do that for like 5 minutes. So I think we could just talk about science all day. But I know that we have other things we need to do. We are here as a support for you. So even if you just want to have a thought partner around conversations like how do we move forward, when do we think about it, let us know. We're willing to come out and work with you and support you, be a guide, be whatever we can do to help you. The last thing I want to do before I close, I want to just talk about one other thing that's come up, because many of you have been participating in our annual leadership conference, which is coming up on March 8th this year. This is our 5th one, and some of you have been with us since the beginning. This year we are, the focus of the conference is really through this lens of equity. Specifically equity through the nature of science and the three-dimensional learning that happens in NGSS. So we're trying to really think about the role that science and how science can support all students. We know that some of that is structural things where students don't have access to science content or to science learning, but a lot of it is simply the experiences and how students engage in science with their teachers. So we want to invite you to join us again for our 5th leadership conference. It's one day, it's at the Liberty Station Conference Center. We'll have an opening session, we'll have a couple breakout sessions so teams can kind of decide what information is really useful for your district, and they can get that information, and then there's time for the teams to think about how they move forward with that. So I hope to see you all there. It's one of the funnest days of learning, and thank you very much, and we hope to help you soon.
If you have any questions, make sure you contact John. He and Chelsea and Crystal, our science coordinators, are a wealth of knowledge. So I've heard there's some temperature issues in the room. It's cold. So our wonderful folks here are looking into that. So I appreciate that, thank you so much for coming and helping to try and fix that. Okay, so we have about 25 minutes left in our agenda. And so we're going to move into the section on our Assessment for Learning series. We most likely won't get through the whole of it, but that's okay, because what we'll do at our next meeting is we will complete what we were working on and then fold that into the formative assessment work that we do at our next meeting. So we'll just see how we do over the next few minutes, and then we will, whatever we don't finish, we will pick up and go with our next meeting, okay? Okay, so the last time we were together, we spent time on building a data culture. You took a self-assessment that kind of gauged where you were in terms of the best qualities of that. And you had some conversations and hopefully went back to your district and kind of thought about where are we and how can we make improvements. So the next few meetings, including today, we're going to be really focusing on some particular aspects that we don't think about sometimes when we think about assessment, or we need to learn more about. That being thinking about universal screening, and then of course formative assessment, which is such a huge way to impact teaching and learning. And so the more we know and the better skilled we are at those processes, the more we'll know about our kids so we can design our programs to meet their needs. So I wanted to first start with this, and then we passed these out to your table so you can see them. This is the California MTSS framework. How many of you are familiar with this document? Okay, I see a lot of hands. That's excellent. And the reason why I wanted to start with this is when we think about MTSS, we think about providing support at the point of need for every child. And I also wanted to bring this up because if you look at the top bar, there are 3 parts of that. We have our academic instruction, so how do we improve the academic achievement of our students, making sure they have what they need to progress academically. But there's also 2 other areas. One is behavior instruction, and then the other is social emotional instruction. The state of if you look at the original SWIFT MTSS framework, the social emotional piece is not there. California added that because the state, and I think we all know that we need to help address our students' social emotional skills so that they can engage more productively in academic learning. They all go together. They all go together. Strong academics impacts behavior, vice versa. So they're synergistic, the three of them. One thing that's important is if you look at the first bullet underneath each one of the academic behavior and social emotional instruction, it says identify a comprehensive assessment system. That's big. That's a kind of a broad term. What is a comprehensive assessment system? It seems wordy, but we're going to try and dive into it a little bit today and see how it impacts our work as CNI leaders. That's why I want to bring this up. And knowing that all of the pieces, the pillars underneath, help support the work of our children in our schools. And we're here on this left column here, which is administrative leadership. You're the leaders in your district. And so the more knowledge you have, the more support you have for your schools, the better our students do. So I wanted to connect that to MTSS because this is something we're working on. I know many of your districts are either in the SUMS grant or have been in the SUMS grant, but knowing that this is where our state is going in terms of supporting our children. Okay, so when we think about purposes of assessment, so what are the different purposes of assessment in a comprehensive assessment system? A lot of times we start with bullet 4, which is outcome and accountability. How well are we doing overall? And that's plan evaluation. So that's the SBAC. Those are those big assessments. And so we start there to see how well we're doing, but that data that we get isn't as actionable as the other parts of a comprehensive system that we can use to actually make changes in the classroom. We talk about it like the analogy of an autopsy. You can go in and look, but the person has already died, so there's not really much you can do for them. But when we go to the doctor for our yearly checkups, those are the ways we find out what's wrong that we can treat and hopefully don't have to get to that place sooner than we would like to. So what we're going to be looking at, and so the other pieces on this slide is who is at risk, and that's the screening process. So problem identification. There's diagnostics, so why is this issue happening? And then there's progress monitoring. So is our instruction or intervention working to fix the problem? So first we have to figure out what the problem is. We have to figure out why it's happening. Then we have to progress monitor to see if what we're putting in place as a support makes a difference. And then at the end, we can look at the outcome, okay? So that's why we started at the bottom, now we're going back up to the top to kind of research all those other pieces of a comprehensive assessment system. Okay, so we're gonna do a fist to 5. I wanted you to think about the term universal screening. And I want you to think about where you would fall on this continuum. I don't understand it at all would be a 1. I think I need to learn more. I think I get it. I totally get it. Or I could come up here and take Shannon's place and I could teach all of you about universal screening. So I just want to get a range from the room and see where you are when I say the term universal screening, what number comes to mind. So go ahead and show me. 3, 2, 1. Okay, I've got everywhere from 1 to 4. Okay, so that's good. So we have a range. So some of this information that I'll share with you will be a refresher, and others it'll be new information. Hopefully the resources I share with you when we go forward will help even those that are a 4, some new ways to kind of think about your planning process for the implementation of universal screeners. I also, when you go into your slideshow, I put in some ideas, because one of the things that I think we think about a lot is we think about academic screening, but when we think about behavior or social emotional, that's harder. And there's not as many resources out there. So I've been doing some work and research on this through my district and through other supports to find some resources. So I'm going to share those with you so you can take a look at them and see if they might work for your district. Okay, so here's universal screening defined. Can one page, will you read this out loud? Okay, so when we look at this, when we think about MTSS, it's the systematic assessment of all children. So this is something that we are doing to get a baseline of understanding of where our children are, whether it be social emotional skills, behavior skills, or academic skills. So why universal screening? So the idea is to help find students whose problems are not immediately obvious. There are many, many children in our classroom that are very complacent, compliant, they sort of roll with whatever the teacher is doing, but there are issues there that could be of a social emotional nature, could be of an academic nature, that we might not know at the surface. So doing something like having a universal screener to help assess all of our students and see where they are is a way for us to get to those problems that might not be immediately obvious, catch them, and fix them before they become really detrimental to that student's progression. We want to try and have some high degree of accuracy. So if we do an assessment for all students, we know we're all doing the same assessment. We can all look at the data together. It's not like we're looking at a fourth grade team and I use this assessment, I use this assessment, I use this assessment. It's very difficult to collaborate when you do that. So this will help us look at students as a whole. We are working towards the idea of moving away from my classroom, my kids, to this is my grade level, our kids, this is our school, this is our students. And so in order to have that real understanding, we need to know where all of our students are. It's not enough that I'm a teacher in my classroom and I know how my students are doing. We have to think about the whole school or the whole district. I already mentioned this, early identification leads to early intervention. And really, the idea is to think about the tools and supports and interventions that you have available. Sometimes we have some ready, set interventions that we have on our campus. But once we do some universal screening, we find out those interventions and what we learned about our kids, they do not match. So we have to really think about how do we design the supports and interventions to match up with what we know about our kids through something like a universal screener. It's most effective and efficient by doing it that way. Okay. So the characteristics, I spoke about this already. It's accessible and administrator to all students. There should be a quick turnaround, and then it's repeatable and reliable. So what I want you to do first, before we get into the more nuts and bolts of the planning process about universal screeners, I want you to look at these 4 statements. And I want you to think about it for a minute in your own district and figure out which ones apply to us. So number 1 is we look at what's available and provide that support or intervention to the student. Number 2 is we use data collected about the student to match student to an appropriate existing support or intervention. Or we develop individualized supports and interventions based on student-specific needs. Or we develop an inventory of supports based on risks identified through a systematic screening of all students. So where are you? We all know that you provide supports and interventions to kids. Every school and every district does it. But where are you in terms of how your district is looking at this? So go ahead and think about it and then have a conversation. Where are you right now? Okay, take about 2 more minutes and then we'll do some sharing. Okay, let's come back together. Can I ask for 1 or 2 volunteers to share with the whole group about where your district is in terms of thinking about this idea, or what your table discussed? And Oscar can give you the cube. Thank you.
So we actually just talked as a high school only districts, when you're looking at some of the available resources, that we find that we're probably giving a lot of resources to the kids at the very top and maybe not doing a great job of evaluating kind of your tier 2 and the students that need some supports. So coming up with a more systematic approach, I mean, and obviously that's what MTSS is, but at a high school only district, how do we do a better job of evaluating and getting more of our resources spread out to more of our students?
Okay, perfect. Can I have one more? Oscar's in the back. He's like pacing around. It's okay. I was wondering, Jeanette, I heard you talking about Michael Fullen. Can you share what you said about social emotional? What you said? I thought that was very important.
So Michael Fulling was out yesterday with many of the superintendents, and he was talking about the idea of where we should be engaged in the work of teaching the whole child, right? So that whole idea of, again, the academics, behavior, and social emotional. But he was emphasizing the fact that if we focus on the social emotional aspects of a child's development, that the academics will come with that. So if kids are engaged, they're happy, they feel safe, I mean, it's not a surprise that they're going to be more apt to learn. He was talking about the fact that there are many kids that academically they're off the charts. There was a study that he shared about valedictorians and how after graduating high school, many of them are homeless, many of them are not successful in college, and obviously the research that goes with the suicide rates with kids that do very well academically because they're stressed out all the time. And so anyway, that was a conversation that he had with superintendents, that oftentimes we push the academics and we focus on that as school leaders, and we are starting to develop ideas around social emotional, but he was talking about the notion of really starting at the SEL level, and then the academics will come.
Thank you for sharing that. And I wanted to share that because when we think about something like screening all of our kids for what we want to learn in order to support them, social emotional behaviors and skills are not sometimes as evident as academic. You can give a test and see how a student's reading or writing. Getting into the mind of a child or mind of a student is a lot more complicated. So that's where we've sort of had this gap in terms of how do we do that. And so what we're going to talk about for 2 minutes, because then we're going to end our meeting in a second, and then we'll revisit, we'll come back to this in terms of how do we plan this, how do we implement it at our next meeting, just because of time. I did put on your table a document that my district used when we were thinking about having schools implement universal screening. And so we really didn't want to just pick something off the shelf and give it. We really wanted to be thoughtful about where we were, and then how can we make sure that it's successfully implemented, the teachers feel secure, they feel trained, they feel like we have a plan to use the data. And so there's 4 sections in there. One is preparation, one is building a foundation, clarifying goals, and then identifying resources and logistics. It really helped our schools and our principals think about all of these different pieces in order to have a successful implementation. And so when we come back together at our next meeting, we'll go deeper into that. And then we'll have this conversation about where you focused your efforts so far. And then the last thing I wanted to share is we had Dr. Clay Cook. He came to my district for 2 years. He's a clinical psychologist and social emotional learning specialist from Minnesota. And he helped us really think about options for behavior and social emotional assessing that. How do we do that, and how can we get the information that we need? So what I've done for you is I've taken his best ideas and I've put them here on this slide. They're live links that you can go to for ideas to help assess those pieces. Additionally, how many of you have heard, I heard the term panorama coming around. Have some of you heard of panorama? So we use that in our district for social emotional assessment, and I'm going to show you. I put in here, this is free downloadable from Panorama. Now, Panorama can help you design your own based on your needs, but this is downloadable so you can see the kind of work that they do. And so I just wanted to show you some of the things that they assess. And it might be something for you to look at if you're really interested in getting to knowing the social emotional. So here are the things that they are able to assess through using their surveys: grit, growth mindset, self-management, social awareness, self-efficacy, learning strategies, classroom effort, social perspective taking, and self-efficacy about specific subjects. Oops, sorry about that. And each one of those pieces comes in grades 3 through 5 or 6 through 12, and they're short. So it's something that you can do quickly in your classrooms and get some real baseline data about how are our students doing with self-management? How are they doing with grit and perseverance? And those are things that you can help adjust your classroom management strategies and also adjust the understanding that your teachers have about the students that are in front of them. So my suggestion is to look at those resources and see if anything might be able to spark a conversation about your district, because I really feel like we are doing better with academic screening, but when it comes to trying to figure out the behavior and social emotional skills, that's harder. And so I put these in here just to spark a conversation perhaps at your district, so you can think about universal screening beyond just academics and meeting the needs of the whole child. So like I said, we'll go deeper into this at our next meeting, and we'll also connect it to how this influences progress monitoring and formative assessment when Melissa is here with me for the next 2 sessions together, okay? I know that this part was short, but I really felt like you needed to learn and understand all of the pieces coming down towards you with the schools. That was really critical because you're gonna have to be doing things with it right away. And so that was the timeliness and the decision to spend some time with your understanding on that. I just wanted to share a couple of quick things with you before we finish. This is also a great book. If your effort, we use this book in the district I came from. It, Systematic Screenings of Behavior to Support Instruction. It's a really good resource, and it's from preschool to high school. So if you want to think about screening for behavior, this book is a really great resource. I have it bookmarked and written all over, but it was really helpful if you want to have something for this issue. Okay, I just want to share a couple things before we finish. I know we're ending. We have Pam Allen. She's going to be coming to our district on March 20th from 8 to 11:30, and she is amazing speaker. She's written 26 books on reading, and we are going to be providing breakfast, and she's going to be speaking. And you'll also get a copy of her book, Every Child a Super Reader, 7 Strengths to Open a World of Possible. This was she's an amazing speaker in talking about how do we make students love reading. And so it's $25 a person, but you get the book. So it's almost like you're getting the book, and then you get to talk to the author herself. So I wanted to share that with you. The link is there if you'd like to register for that. Then I put some information about Pam Allen and her background. And then the last thing I wanted to share is SISC. The SISC Symposium registration closes January 31st, so it's like a week away. So if you want to register, please do. And I wanted to let you know that if you do register, we're having a networking dinner in downtown Disney at the Naples Ristorante Italian. And if you've already registered for SISC, you should have already received an email from us regarding this. But I just want to put a little added incentive that if you are coming to SISC, that we hope you will join us and have some networking and be able to talk in a social situation away from the county office or your district offices and be able to get to know each other a little better. We'll have county Office of Ed people and then district people there to share an evening together in Anaheim. Okay, it is 11:01. All right, we did it. Okay, good. All right, so this is what we're going to do. Denise sent you an email that has the reflection form on it. I do read those very carefully and try to adjust to meet your needs. So please take a second and fill that out. It shouldn't take very long. And I wanted to thank Jeanette, Steve, and John, and then Patty who left, for coming to the meeting to help us really understand a very complex issue that we will be dealing with over the next couple of years as we kind of, like she said, build the plane as we fly it. So thank you so much for coming, and I hope you have a really great rest of your day. Thanks, guys.